body, but I have a body in which I can control my senses and can understand my destination. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisances to the Supreme Person of Godhead, by whom I have been blessed with this body, and by whose grace I can see him within and without. Very interesting verse. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The evolutionary process of different types of bodies is something like that of a fructifying flower. Just as there are different stages in the growth of a flower, the bud stage, the blooming stage, and the full-fledged, fully grown stage of aroma and beauty, there are 8,400,000 species of bodies in gradual evolution. And there is systematic progress from the lower species of life to the higher. The human form of life is supposed to be the highest, for it offers consciousness for getting out of the clutches of birth and death. The fortunate child in the womb of his mother realizes his superior position and is thereby distinguished from other bodies. Animals in bodies lower than that of the human being are conscious only as far as their bodily distress and happiness are concerned. They cannot think of more than their bodily necessities of life: eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. But in the human form of life, by the grace of God, the consciousness is so developed that a man can evaluate his exceptional position and thus realize the self and the Supreme Lord. The word Dhamma Sariri means that we have a body in which we can control the senses and mind. The complication of materialistic life is due to an uncontrolled mind and uncontrolled senses. One should feel grateful to the Supreme Personality of Godhead for having obtained such a nice human form of body, and one should properly utilize it. The distinction between an animal and a man is that the animal cannot control himself and has no sense of decency, whereas the human being has the sense of decency and can control himself. If this controlling power is not exhibited by the human being, then he is no better than an animal. By controlling the senses or by the process of yoga regulation, one can understand the position of his self, the super soul, the world, and their interrelation. Everything is possible by controlling the senses. Otherwise, we're no better than animals. Real self-realization by means of controlling the senses is explained herein. One should try to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead and one's own self also. To think oneself the same as the Supreme is not self-realization. Here, it is clearly explained that the Supreme Lord is Anadi, or Purana, and he has no other cause. The living entity is born of the Supreme Godhead as part and parcel. It is confirmed in the Brahma Samhita, Anadir Adir Govinda. Govinda, the Supreme Person, has no cause. He is unborn, but the living entity is born of him. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Mamai Vamsa, both the living entity and the Supreme Lord are unborn, but it has to be understood that the supreme cause of the part and parcel is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Brahma Samhita therefore says that everything has come from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sarva Karana Karana. The Vedanta Sutra confirms this also. Janmad Asya Yata. The absolute truth is the original source of everyone's birth. Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita, Aham Sarvasya Prabhava. I am the source of birth of everything, including Brahma and Lord Shiva and the living entities. This is self-realization. One should know that he is under the control of the Supreme Lord and not think that he is fully independent. Otherwise, why should he be put into conditional life? Okay, so very interesting. Aham Sarvasya Prabhava. I am the source of birth of everything, including Brahma and Lord Shiva and the living entities. This is self-realization. One should know that he is under the control of the Supreme Lord and not think that he is fully independent. Otherwise, why should he be put into conditional life? Okay, pretty straightforward knowledge here. And then Janmada Sayata, the absolute truth, is the original source of everyone's birth. Okay. So we're all coming originally from Krishna. Yeah, the real important point here in this purport. Well, let me read the verse first, and then we'll read the main point in the purport. The living entity in another type of body sees only by instinct. He knows only the agreeable and disagreeable sense perceptions of that particular body. But I have a body in which I can control my senses and can understand my destination. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisances to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by whom I have been blessed with this body, and by whose grace I can see him within and without. So, there is an evolutionary process of different types of bodies. And there are 8,400,000 species of bodies. And all of these species are involved in gradual evolution. And there is a systematic progress from the lower species of life to the higher. So the human form is supposed to be the highest form. Because in the human form, there's consciousness for getting out of the clutches of birth and death. Well, how many human beings are taking advantage of that possibility? Most human beings become attracted to staying in the material world of sense gratification and don't take advantage of that, let's say, special ability of becoming conscious for getting out of the clutches of birth and death. However, The fortunate child in the womb of his mother realizes his superior position and is thereby distinguished from other bodies. Animals in bodies lower than that of the human being are conscious only as far as their bodily distress and happiness are concerned. They cannot think of more than their bodily necessities of life, eating, sleeping, mating, and defense. But in the human form of life, by the grace of God, the consciousness is so developed that a man can evaluate his exceptional position and thus realize the self and the Supreme Lord. Well, out of the 8,400,000 species of bodies, and they're all in gradual evolution, the human form is supposed to be the highest, for it offers the consciousness for getting out of the clutches of birth and death. So how many people actually are taking advantage of that special possibility? Not many, unfortunately. Not many at all. So it is saying here that the fortunate child in the womb of his mother realizes his superior position and is thereby distinguished from other bodies. So I guess every living entity, while still in the womb of the mother, is conscious of, let's say, his desire to get out of the womb, first of all, and also to have a spiritual life. But as soon as the living entity gets out of the womb of the mother, for some reason or other, forgets its horrible position in the womb and its prayers to be free from the cycle of birth and death, and becomes enamored by the mundane life of material nature. In other words, becoming, again, a victim of Maya. So it does say that while the child is in the womb of the mother, he or she realizes his superior position and is thereby distinguished from other bodies. In other words, from animals in the womb of a mother. Animals in the bodies lower than that of the human being are conscious only as far as their bodily distress and happiness are concerned. They cannot think of more than their bodily necessities of life, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. But in the human form of life, by the grace of God, the consciousness is so developed that a man can evaluate his exceptional position and thus realize the self and the Supreme Lord. Well, if you realize yourself and the Supreme Lord, you can understand that your position in the material world is not at all, let's say, happy. And it is actually suffering. And therefore, a genuine human being tries to get out of being in a material body, knowing well that there is a spiritual world where one can have a body that is eternal, rather than the covering body they have now that is temporary. So the word Dhamma Sariri means that we have a body in which we can control the senses and the mind. That implies that uncivilized human beings and animals do not have a body where they can control the senses and the mind. Animals are all controlled by instinct. Instinct is the dictate of the super soul. It's in the heart of the animal. So, but a human being has limited free will. The animals don't have limited free will. They function by instinct, which is the control of the super soul. So the human being has a body in which we can control the senses and the mind. The complications of materialistic life is due to an uncontrolled mind and uncontrolled senses. One should feel grateful to the Supreme Personality of Godhead for having obtained such a nice human form, a body, and one should properly utilize it. The distinction between an animal and a man is that the animal cannot control himself and has no sense of decency, whereas the human being has the sense of decency and can control himself. If this controlling power is not exhibited by the human being, then he is no better than an animal. By controlling the senses or by the process of yoga regulation, one can understand the position of his self, the super soul, the world, and their interrelation. Everything is possible by controlling the senses. Otherwise, we're no better than animals. Well, that's a profound statement. How do you control the senses? You should keep them always engaged in the service of Krishna. Then you're controlling the senses and the mind. If the mind and the senses are not controlled, then we have a very precarious life and we will stay in the cycle of birth and death. So how to control the senses? Well, Prabhupada has given us that process. It's by regularly chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
That means that when we chant Hare Krishna, we are focusing our mind on Krishna and giving up our focus on sense gratification. As long as the mind is focused on sense gratification, it is controlled as if under the spell of a witch. And the individual person is not really in control of his mind and body. But when we engage in Krishna consciousness sincerely, then we are under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in that situation, he gives us intelligence to make the right decisions in life and avoid sense gratification and wasting their life doing things that are impossible to achieve. What is an example of doing something that is impossible to achieve? Number one, finding a way to make the body immortal. Number two, trying to go to the moon and other planets. Number three, trying to make the body, number three is ignoring Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead and living a life of sense gratification. So, can someone do that? Yes, it's something they can do, but it leads to nothing. When I say it leads to nothing, it doesn't solve the problem of life. What is the problem of life? to get out of the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. So, to find some position in life where one is completely happy and is eternally happy is impossible when our mind is focused on sense gratification. When the mind transfers its attention to becoming Krishna conscious, then it is possible to find a way to have eternal life. We are eternal. Everybody's eternal. There's no question about it. But to actually experience eternal life, we would have to change our consciousness from sense gratification to devotional service. Otherwise, our mind will always be attached to mundane material things and not be able to achieve eternal life. In other words, they'll continue the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. Everybody has an eternal soul. Everybody has eternal life, but without engaging in the service of Krishna, that eternal soul is eternally going up and down in the different species of life due to sense gratification. As soon as we use our senses in the service of Krishna, now the Maya body will try and stop the senses from working. So they'll get engaged in silent meditation and try to stop the senses. The devotee does not try to stop the senses, but the devotee will purify the senses to be always engaged in the service of Krishna. That's a major difference between the Maya body and the devotee. The Maya body can, for some period of time, deny the action of the senses, but not eternally. Therefore, the Maya body will eventually fall down, even though they perform great and severe tapasya. But the devotee's tapasya is chanting, dancing, and feasting in Krishna consciousness. So instead of denying the activity of the senses, the devotee will purify the senses by keeping them engaged in devotional service. And especially by chanting and dancing in arti and in doing sankirtan and so forth. That chanting and dancing is scientific. It's the way to free yourself from the cycle of birth and death. Okay, so Prabhupada writes here, the human form of life is supposed to be the highest, for it offers consciousness for getting out of the clutches of birth and death. Very profound statement. The fortunate child in the womb of his mother realizes his superior position and is thereby distinguished from other bodies. Animals in bodies lower than that of the human being are conscious only as far as their bodily distress and happiness are concerned. They cannot think of more than their bodily necessities of life: eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. But in the human form of life, by the grace of God, the consciousness is so developed that a man can evaluate his exceptional position and thus realize the self and the Supreme Lord. Well, what about the two-legged human beings who don't try to understand their relationship with God? That means they're no better than an animal. And they act like animals by engaging in sense gratification and all kinds of abominable activities. So, um, so the main giveaway here is the complication of materialistic life is due to an uncontrolled mind and uncontrolled senses. One should feel grateful to the Supreme Personality Godhead for having obtained such a nice human form of body, and one should properly use it. The distinction between an animal and a man is that the animal cannot control himself and has no sense of decency, whereas the human being has the sense of decency and can control himself. Yeah, the animal can't control himself from passing urine and stool. The animal can pass urine and stool anywhere. It can be in the temple, and we see it, like our cows that are in the temple, they'll just pass stool and urine. They don't know how to control themselves. But as a human being, we can control ourselves and go to the bathroom and pass stool and urine. Can you train the animal to not pass stool and urine? But wait and go to the urinal or to the bathroom? Not really. Actually, when let's see, Radhika is going to pass stool or urine, she stops. You can't make her move. And you think, well, what's going on here? And then you see that she's passing urine or she's passing stool. And she can stop anywhere. She can be in the middle of the temple. So stop and pass stool and urine. And then we have to, rush to catch the stool and urine before with some kind of a cloth or whatever. If this controlling power is not exhibited by the human being, then he is no better than an animal. By controlling the senses or by the process of yoga regulation, one can understand the position of his self, the super soul, the world, and their interaction and interrelationship. Everything is possible by controlling the senses. Otherwise, we are no better than animals. Now, that is the major statement. That's our takeaway today. Everything is possible by controlling the senses. Otherwise, we are no better than animals. Real self-realization by means of controlling the senses is explained herein. One should try to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead in one's own self also. To think oneself the same as the Supreme is not self-realization. Here, it is clearly explained that the Supreme Lord is Anadi, or Purana, and he has no other cause. The living entity is born of the Supreme Godhead as part and parcel. It is confirmed in the Brahma Samhita. Anadir, Adir Govinda, Sarvakarana Karanam. Govinda, the Supreme Person, has no cause. He is unborn, but the living entity is born of him, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Mamai Vamsa. So, Mamai Vamsa. Both the living entity and the Supreme Lord are unborn, but it has to be understood that the supreme cause of the part and parcel is the Supreme Personality of God. Brahma Samhita therefore says that everything has come from the Supreme Personality of God. Sarva Karana Karana. The Sutra confirms this also. Janma dasya yata. The absolute truth is the original source of everyone's birth, meaning Krishna is the original source of everyone's birth. Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita, Aham sarvasya prabhava. I am the source of birth of everything, including Brahma and Lord Shiva and living entities. This is self-realization. Okay, that's our main takeaway today. This is self-realization, that Krishna is the source of everything and everybody. One should know that he is under the control of the Supreme Lord and not think that he is fully independent. Otherwise, why should he be put into conditional life? Well, because we are in conditional life, then we should understand that we are not fully independent. Those 2 points, we are in conditional life and we are not independent, should give us the basis for being Krishna conscious. The materialistic person thinks he is independent, and he does not realize that he has come from Krishna and he is part and parcel of Krishna. He believes that he is independent and is able to control nature. Obviously, what are the scientists trying to do? Trying to control nature. But they can't. They'll build nice buildings and the nature will come knock it down. They will have nice airplanes and then they crash, just like there was a crash yesterday. And people died. Even though the airplane is nicely built, so forth, but still they crash. That's why I don't like to fly anywhere. Why? Because and birds don't crash unless they're shot, Otherwise, they never fall out of the sky, flying around. But airplanes can crash. Not every day, but every year there are, airplanes that crash. And usually everybody dies. Sometimes not everybody dies. But obviously, being in an airplane is not a very good situation. Because, first of all, you're in a tin, it's like being in a tin box with a lot of other people. And everybody's breathing. And some people are breathing out a lot, a lot of bad germs into the air. Now, of course, they have the airplanes have these good, what do you call it, air purifiers. But nothing is perfect. So we're in a precarious position when we're in an airplane. There's no doubt about it. The airplane could fall out of the sky at any time. And you can catch all kinds of diseases in the airplane due to the fact that you're in close, let's say, association with maybe 100, 200, sometimes 300 people. And they're all breathing, just like you're breathing, in and out. And some people sneeze, and in other ways, put bad germs into the air. Now, there are air purifiers in the airplanes, but nothing is perfect. Okay, so the main statement here, I think, is that the word Dhamma Sariti means that we have a body in which we can control the senses and the mind. That is a very profound statement. That's implying that other living entities don't have a body like that. They are being controlled anyway, but not by themselves, but by the instinct, which means Paramatma. But the human being has limited free will. The animals do not have limited free will. They're being forced to act by instinct, and instinct means by the control of the supersoul. The complication of materialistic life is due to an uncontrolled mind and uncontrolled senses. That is a major statement. What is an uncontrolled mind? Well, a person who smokes, they have an uncontrolled mind. A person who drinks liquor or takes drugs, for sense gratification, they have an uncontrolled mind. Obviously, anyone who smokes is inhaling smoke into the lungs. That's not the purpose of the lungs. Just imagine, you have lungs and you become a smoker. Well, eventually, I saw this happening to my father. He was a chain smoker. Every time he'd come to the end of the cigarette, he would get another cigarette and then touch it to the cigarette that was in his mouth that was on fire, right? And then light the next cigarette, and then he'd throw away the one that was in his mouth that was being used. And now he's starting with a new cigarette. He wouldn't even wait to, throw away the butt of the cigarette and then light his match. He would light it from the cigarette that he was going to throw away. That's called a chain smoker. It was unbelievable. When I think back on it, I think about it, it's just sad. And I actually saw my father suffer 9 months with cancer. And I would hear him sometimes at night screaming, "Give me poison. I want to die," because of the pain of the cancer. It was terrible. And actually, he walked to the hospital. I remember this. He walked to the hospital. And after being treated with chemotherapy, they had to carry him back to the house. In other words, they burned him. This is like in the 1950s, and they basically burned him with chemotherapy. And he came back, and then he suffered 9 months terribly. Sometimes he'd be screaming at night, "Give me poison, I want to die." I was just a little kid, and I got confused hearing that. And then one night, I was sitting next to him. We were watching television, and I felt him falling on me from his bed. He was having a stroke. He completely lost control of his body and fell on me. And, I didn't know what was happening. He was having a stroke. The poor man is suffering because, even after all that, still he would smoke. Still he would ask for a cigarette and smoke. Unbelievable.
So, Maharaj, one question. So what is the reason, Maharaj, why even though suffering is going on, we know the cause and the pain is there, still we are doing so? Is it because of their habit or the tendency, or they are not able to control that, or
Obviously, they have no control. They're being controlled by some drug or some concept in their mind that they have to smoke. Now, it is true that in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, even 60s, the cigarette companies were putting uh, what you would call uh, uh, material uh, things into the cigarette to cause someone to get addicted. Addictive chemicals, that's what they were putting in the cigarette itself. They did it on purpose. So people would be hooked on becoming a chain smoker. Hmm. Then, at one point, that was understood by, let's say, the FDA, different government, uh, different government organizations, and they put a stop to it. They were purposely putting addictive chemicals into the tobacco, and people would be smoking the tobacco, and they would get hooked on smoking. Life is dangerous, especially when there are major companies that want to make money, and they do things to make sure that they're going to have steady customers. And so the tobacco industry became basically something like, a business based on making people hooked on the drugs that they were putting in the tobacco. Tobacco itself, right, as a drug, but they were putting other things into the tobacco to make sure that people would get hooked on smoking. It's very diabolical. That's why many people died of cancer from smoking, like my father. Then, the FDA and all these things, they started to stop them from putting these, very dangerous chemicals into the tobacco. But tobacco itself is a, a drug. Like, for example, there was this one man who was a devotee, and but he was hooked on chewing tobacco, and then he got cancer of the mouth, and I saw it. This happened to him. Eventually, his whole side of the face was destroyed, and you could see, what was going on inside. It was horrible. His whole face, the whole side of his face was destroyed. It wasn't there anymore because he was chewing tobacco. And he learned to do it with other friends of his, all Hindus, all people who had connection to Krishna consciousness. But they were addicted to this chewing tobacco. So, tobacco itself is an intoxicant, right? But if you put other chemicals in it to hook people on chewing tobacco, that's even worse. And that's exactly what the tobacco companies were doing. So even today, you can go into, let's say, supermarket, and there's chewing tobacco for sale, but they lock it up. You have to ask for it. They don't leave it out in the open. Right? Yeah. But it's chewing tobacco, and people buy it. Now what's happening when you're chewing tobacco? It's going directly into your bloodstream, and if you keep doing it over and over again, you're going to get cancer. There's no doubt about it. And they put it on the bottom, the label
Right.
of the chewing tobacco that it can cause cancer. Just like they put it on the cigarettes now. The pack of cigarettes, it says you can get cancer. Have they stopped smoking? No. So if it's bad like that, why don't they stop it? Just like liquor also. Liquor also is bad, right? You can get cancer, you can get so many diseases, sicknesses by drinking liquor. Why don't they stop it? They did. They did have prohibition in the 1920s and a little bit of 1930s. Then they stopped. Why? First of all, they lost money. Secondly, the people were getting the tobacco or they were getting the liquor from gangsters. You know, the whole industry was developed to keep supplying liquor and cigarettes to the people. So instead of the gangsters becoming millionaires, the government again permitted, smoking and liquor. Although the government did for some years make smoking and liquor, a crime. Not a big crime, but uh, they controlled it so that no one could buy those things. So it just led to the gangsters starting bootleg liquor and bootleg cigarettes and so forth. Yeah. So everything is actually controlled by money because they were losing a lot of money because the gangsters were supplying the liquor and the cigarettes. They made them legal again. With some controls, but not much. So today, you can go into a shop and buy liquor. You can go into a shop and buy cigarettes, cigars, chewing tobacco. All that stuff is for sale now. Okay. Yeah, and very sad. Okay, here it says, by controlling the senses or by the process of yoga regulation, one can understand the position of his self, the supersoul, the world, and their interrelation. Everything is possible by controlling the senses. That's a major statement here. Everything is possible by controlling the senses. What are the senses? The eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the skin, and the genital. By controlling the senses or by the process of yoga regulation, one can understand the position of his self, the super soul, the world, and their interrelation. Everything is possible by controlling the senses. Otherwise, we are no better than animals. All right. We should take this as the major statement in this purport and in life also. Everything is possible by controlling the senses. Otherwise, if we don't control the senses, we are no better than animals. Actually, less than animals. Because the animals, they act from instinct, and instinct is the dictation of the supersoul. So we're even worse than animals. Real self-realization by means of controlling the senses is explained herein. One should try to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead and one's own self also. To think oneself the same as the Supreme is not self-realization. Here, it is clearly explained that the Supreme Lord is Anadi or Purana, and he has no other cause. The living entity is born of the Supreme Godhead as part and parcel. It is confirmed in the Brahma Samhita, and Adir Govinda. Govinda, the Supreme Person, has no cause. He is unborn, but the living entity is born of him. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Lamai Vamsa, both the living entity and the Supreme Lord are unborn, but it has to be understood that the supreme cause of the part and parcel is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Brahma Samhita therefore says that everything has come from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sarva Karana Karana. The Vedanta Sutra confirms this also. Janmadasya Yata. The absolute truth is the original source of everyone's birth. Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita, Aham Sarvasya Prabhava. I am the source of birth of everything, including Brahma and Lord Shiva and the living entities. This is self-realization. One should know that he is under the control of the Supreme Lord and not think that he is fully independent. Otherwise, why should he be put into conditional life? Yeah, in other words, if you think clearly, you'll see, am I independent? And you'll understand very carefully, very quickly, no, I'm not independent. I'm being controlled. I don't control my heart. I don't control my eating. I eat something, it turns into stool. I don't know how it's happening. So there's so many mysteries of the body that we don't have control over. It's our body, yes, but we're not really in control of it. So therefore, we can understand if we think carefully that there's another controller that's making the body work, and be conscious. Therefore, it says, this is self-realization. One should know that he is under the control of the Supreme Lord and not think that he is fully independent. Otherwise, why should he be put into conditional life? So that is our takeaway today. This is what we should meditate on. We should understand that we're under the control of the Supreme Lord and not think that we are fully independent. And how do we understand that? Well, we're put into conditional life. Eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So we can't get away from that. Everybody is involved. Now, some people can try and control that, like yogis and so forth. They'll control their eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. But they can't completely stop, but they can curtail it for some time. But they're still controlled by the laws of material nature. They can prolong their lifespan, but they're still going to die. But they might do things to prolong their lifespan, like slow down or stop breathing for some time. Right? So yeah, that can prolong your lifespan for some period, but you can't do it eternally. So by recognizing that we're under the control of the Lord, we become a devotee. By ignoring that and thinking we're independent, we become a Vishayi or a sense gratifier. And we ruin ourselves basically by engaging in sense gratification. Now we can get away with that sense gratification for so many years, but eventually it catches up to us and we suffer terribly. Yeah, just go to a hospital and you'll see it. The suffering of people, or you go to a hospice and you'll see how much people are suffering. Okay, So are there any questions? So, main statement in this purport, Canto 3, Chapter 31, verse number 19. It says, Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita, Aham Sarvasya Prabhava. I am the source of birth of everything, including Brahma and Lord Shiva, and the living entities. This self-realization, this is self-realization. One should know that he is under the control of the Supreme Lord and not think that he is fully independent. Otherwise, why should he be put into conditional life? So many people think that they are independent, fully independent. The devotee realizes that he is not fully independent. That's why he prays regularly every day to Krishna by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So what's today? Today is Thursday, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So today is Thursday. Okay. So any questions, comments?
Maharaj, when it says the last line is conditional life, so if you can explain more, like conditional life means like they're dependent, is that the
You're not in control.
not in control?
There are other forces controlling you. Ultimately, we're all controlled by Krishna. But some people are controlled by sex. Other people are controlled by smoking. Other people are controlled by money. You see, there's so many different things that can control people. And almost everybody is under the control of some materialistic thing. One is completely free when they're engaged every day in devotional service. Now they're not controlled by anything that takes their mind away from Krishna. But as soon as our mind is taken away from Krishna, we're under the control of something or multiple things. It says, this is self-realization. One should know that he is under the control of the Supreme Lord and not think that he is fully independent. All right. Well, that is real knowledge. And self-realization. And we're under the control of the Supreme Lord and not think that we are fully independent. So this body, the mind, everything is under the control of the Lord. We should not think that we are independent. Of course, people try and become independent. You know, they go to the gym, they take supplements, all kinds of things. But they still get old, sick, and die. I had an uncle, and one day he saw me and he said, "Oh, how are you?" I said, "Okay, I'm okay." He said, "Are you taking your supplements?" I was a little surprised. I said, "Why should I take supplements? I mean, I eat every day." Said, no, you don't understand. You know, the the soil in the world now is depleted the vital elements. Therefore, you have to take supplements. So he was taking supplements. He showed me. He had a round type of thing that had the names of different supplements that he had to take in one day. And I was like, there were like 60 of them. So I didn't pay any attention. I said, yeah, okay, I'm going to start taking supplements, but I didn't really do it. But 2 years later, he was dead, and he was still relatively young, like hardly in his 50s. And why? Because of overdose of those supplements. There's just so many. It's just so he wasn't really eating food. He was living off of supplements, thinking that this would, replenish, the energy in his body. But he was taking artificial supplements. So he eventually died of whether it was cancer or something. Anyway, that is called ignorance. And he was a relative of mine. And he gave me a long, let's say, pep talk about you have to take supplements. So I said, but Prabhu, I said, but Cousin Dick, I said, I'm eating food. Said, no, you don't understand. He got really upset when I said that. Then the elements are depleted in the soil, therefore you have to take supplements. But where do the supplements come from? They come from the soil also. Anyway, he unfortunately, 2 years after that, he was dead. Because he wasn't eating food, he was just taking supplements all day long. Terrible. And why did the supplement what do you call it? The supplement business start? Because the earth was being depleted by not being properly managed, right? So you can take so much out of the earth, if you don't put something back in it, it becomes depleted, and you end up with a desert, right? So in order, the supplement industry developed due to the fact that the governments and people were not taking care of the earth. You keep taking out of the earth the elements and not put anything back, then it becomes depleted. Eventually, it becomes like sand, like the desert. They didn't realize that until the 1930s, where there were sandstorms, big sandstorms in the United States, because the earth was completely depleted, and they were taking out all the good things from the earth and not putting anything back. So then that stopped, and now people spend time cultivating the earth and putting back, the like, for example, nature has its natural process of replenishing the earth. You have a tree, and the tree pulls the supplements from the earth, and then a tree grows. Then eventually it has leaves. Then the leaves fall down on the ground, and then on the ground, they are they eventually are broken down, and they put back ingredients into the earth, right? So that there's a cycle going on. But if you interrupt that cycle, then there's going to be a famine. Nature by itself is working by this cycle. An animal's body dies in a forest, and then it eventually is broken down, and it actually helps the earth, right? And so many animals are pooping in nature. Well, all that is being recycled and it regenerates the earth. When you stop these cycles, then there's going to be, there'll be a desert, and things won't grow anymore because the recycling is stopped. So if you have a garden, you have to put fertilizer in the garden, right? If you want plants to grow nicely. And how do you get the fertilizer? Well, you can make it yourself. You can get all the leaves that fall down from trees and other types of, the poop of the animals, like a dog or a cat or a cow. The best poop is cow, right? And you keep it so that it can break down, and then now you have fertilizer. And now you use that to replenish the soil in your garden, and you grow nice vegetables. So all the things that people throw away, like they eat something, and then like you eat a watermelon, but you throw away the rind. Well, you shouldn't throw it away. You can put it in a bucket or something and let it break down, and then you use that as a fertilizer, right? So that cycle is there. If we try and break that cycle by throwing away the refuse of our food, we're actually losing something that can be composted and can rejuvenate our own soil. Right?
Mm.
So you have these gigantic places where so much food waste is thrown, right? And they basically just throw it somewhere far away from the city. But it could all be composted, and you wouldn't have to buy any fertilizer. You can make your own compost by using those things. Like there's always things that you're going to throw away. Like let's say there are bones and there are stems and different things that you're not going to eat. But all those things can be composted and enrich your soil. So nature has its way of breaking things down and replenishing the soil. If you throw everything away in the garbage, you're basically wasting money. And somebody else is going to get the money and compost what you threw away.
Good.
Okay, so thank you very much. If there are no more questions, then there will be no more answers. And we can go merrily along in this material world, chanting Hare Krishna.
Hari.
All glories to Srila
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.